Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant. We welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers, a busy edition today, and we hope you are enjoying your weekend. Later, would Kentuckians cut back on fuels and products that emit carbon dioxide in the air if there was a cost associated with it? A bipartisan group called the Citizens Climate Lobby is working for that. Their Appalachian coordinator will join us later. But first, it's been a while since we visited with Kentucky Agriculture Commissioner Ryan Quarles, and he is here with us today. We'll talk about new legislation passed in the recently concluded General Assembly session. What's the outlook for crops as spring has had its fits and starts yet again? Farmers are also getting up and running for the season ahead. They've been greatly expanded during the Commissioner Quarles' tenure as far as some of those farmers markets out there. And then there are the political questions. Long considered a likely Republican candidate for governor, Quarles hasn't said a lot about that lately. Will he today? We'll find out. Commissioner Ryan Quarles, welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. Appreciate you being here.
Glad to be here, Bill.
Got a busy agenda here, right? We saw all kinds of disruptions and changes during the pandemic. People seemed to turn more local as they bought their produce and their meat and their fresh agricultural products. Is that trend continuing?
That's exactly right. If there's a silver lining that came out of COVID-19 that's a positive thing in agriculture, is that more Kentuckians than ever are choosing to buy local, which meant that our Kentucky Proud program, which is already highly successful across our state, really got a boost as many Kentuckians like myself learned how to cook again. Our farmers markets are opening up right now. We encourage all Kentuckians that if you want to support Kentucky farmers, visit a farmers market. We have 173 of those. And we have a lot of programs that help promote not just delicious food, but also the experience of farmers markets. It's family friendly. A lot of times there's music and other group activities, but that's a great way to help support local agriculture and support your local taste buds.
So would you say that the farmers markets have completely recovered from any downturn they had during the pandemic?
Well, in fact, I don't think there was ever a downturn. That we saw Kentucky Proud sales actually increase as restaurants were unfairly shut down. A lot of Kentuckians started sourcing their ingredients from farmers markets as well as local meat. If you remember, just 2 years ago, when the pandemic hit, there were meat shortages in some of our grocery stores. And one thing that we've done in the past 2 years was reinvest tobacco settlement dollars into local meat processing. And to this day, I'm proud to report that over 30 processors have utilized our programs and have expanded local meat processing here in Kentucky. And we hope that this is something that's not a fad, but something that's here to stay.
With transportation costs being saved by that, right, if you buy more local?
There's a lot of issues that we're facing right now, but if we can reduce the average distance that food travels from the farm gate to the dinner plate, which right now is 1,500 miles. When we reduce that, that's less diesel fuel, less energy, and it keeps those profits and revenues local. And so we want to help work with our restaurants, farmers markets, grocery stores, any consumer, including our school systems, to put local ag on the menu.
Commissioner, the price of food, though, has skyrocketed in recent months nationwide. We know that. What factors in Kentucky are driving that up? What's controllable and what's not on the state level?
There's a lot of factors that go into the price of food at the grocery store. And let me be really clear with you. It's not the grocery stores or the farmers that's driving this. This is record inflation. The Biden administration has done next to nothing to reduce record high 40-year inflation that we're seeing, and that drives up the cost of not just food but other commodities. Fuel prices are up, oftentimes doubling in prices from a year ago, and fertilizer costs are really painful right now for our farmers. And in 2022, a lot of the production decisions have already been made across Kentucky's fields. But my worry is not just the price of fertilizer, but its availability next year for 2023, because the conflict in Ukraine is affecting supply chain issues here in Kentucky as well as all across the United States.
What would you like to see done to lower inflation?
Well, I think the major issues that you can do, the economist in me says you have to stop having out of control spending. That when you spend $6 trillion at the national level and print money, something that the state of Kentucky can't do, it's a natural conclusion that's going to devalue the value of a dollar. And that really hurts middle class and lower class Kentuckians because it wipes out the value of one's savings. We also have seen an uptick in interest rates, which is going to make the cost of doing business more expensive for everybody. But we have to have both monetary and fiscal policy that reflects a policy decision to reduce inflation. We saw that during the Reagan administration. I think it's time we see it again.
Did you think too much money came, say, to Kentucky during by infrastructure spending and that bill and the COVID relief bills that passed?
Well, it's interesting that you call it an infrastructure spending, because not much money that was in the infrastructure bill actually went towards infrastructure. And there are some positive things that came out of that. One of the initiatives out of my office is to promote rural broadband. And I think it's time for us to get the job done, especially on the critical and most expensive part of that is the last mile. And of course, we need to keep our roadways, bridgeways, railways, runways open for business as well. But I do think that spending your way out of inflation will not work.
What was the spending in that bill that you have a major problem with in Kentucky?
Well, it's that a lot of the spending that was passed by a partisan Congress in Washington, D.C., I think was geared towards rewarding interest groups at the national level. Here in Kentucky, we're so fortunate that we just wrapped up a Kentucky General Assembly that actually diverted some of those ARPA funds towards infrastructure projects such as the Mountain Parkway, a new bridge across to the Ohio River as well. And of course, we got to make sure that we deploy those funds, especially on rural broadband, so we can connect rural Kentucky.
Weather is very hard to predict and impossible to control. What factors are you watching in terms of crops this year? Because once again, we've had a pretty tough spring.
That's right. Now for the third year in a row, we've had somewhat of a late start with getting our crops out. So whenever you see a delay, a wet, damp, or cool spring, it's going to affect that critical window, that planting window for farmers across Kentucky. Here in central Kentucky, we're not quite as concerned. We are behind, but now my friends down in western and west Kentucky, they're a solid 2 weeks behind right now. Some of those producers usually in a normal year will have their entire crop out by this point. So what does that mean? Well, it could affect the price of commodities across the entire country. But right now, what you're seeing is a flurry of activity of our farmers getting back out into the fields. And we want to ask Kentuckians, whether they're in a farm community or not, to share the roadways. We want to prevent accidents. So if you get stuck behind a slow-moving tractor, I know it can be frustrating sometimes, but just remember that Kentucky farm families want to get home safe to their families just like you. So please share the road during this hectic planting season.
Maybe think about where it's going, right, and the benefits.
Right.
But what are the main agricultural exports of Kentucky?
Well, we produce about $6 billion worth of crops and livestock commodities each and every year, and we export about $2 billion of that. A lot of that is not just in raw agricultural products such as corn or soybeans, but it's also value-added products as well, such as Kentucky bourbon, where we distill that corn into something that has some value to it. We're also big on timber exports, which is part of agriculture, but of course, the trade side of me can't talk about Kentucky without mentioning not only bourbon, but also our Kentucky racehorses. I'm also fortunate to be aggressive and help lead trade missions around the world to help export Kentucky agriculture, including this spring, where we helped spearhead a trade mission to the United Kingdom, which was putting a 25% trade tariff on Kentucky bourbon. I was so proud that when we left after high-level negotiations, that working with our principals at the federal level, that tariff reduction is actually going to be reduced this summer. And we have the Kentucky Derby later this week. Kentucky gets 2 minutes of the world's attention, and there's no better place to promote Kentucky proud and Kentucky agriculture than at the fastest 2 minutes in sports. And I'm so proud that it's not just the Derby that gets us a lot of attention, but a lot of the Derby winners and contenders end up racing in the Middle East, in England, in Australia, in Japan. And so it's not just one race, but it's a cascading effect. And 2/3 of all the horses that are exported out of the United States have Kentucky roots.
Well, that's a busy time for you, more so than people may realize, right? I mean, the Agriculture Department has a substantial oversight at Derby time.
That's right. So we use it as an opportunity to not only make sure that animal welfare standards are upheld and our veterinarians are there making sure paperwork's in place, but we also use it as a way to promote Kentucky Proud foods, especially while we have so many visitors coming to Kentucky. So that means our distilled spirits, our wines, our foods. Just a couple weeks ago, we had a They're Off lunch where we help remind folks to put a little piece of Kentucky on their dinner plates each and every year.
The legislative session has recently concluded, as you mentioned. Republicans pushed through a new budget, substantial spending in lots of areas, lots of raises given, some tax changes, some some conservative social bills, including abortion restrictions, rules for transgender athletes, funding for charter schools. You served in the legislature. Overall, how do you think they did this year?
I thought it was a great session for the majority parties and for Kentucky. Our budget got passed with only 3 no votes in the entire General Assembly of 138. Unfortunately, the governor vetoed many sections of that, but we have a strong conservative supermajorities in the House and Senate that overrode 30 bills, including 2 of my own, that become law. I thought it was a great session, that we had pro-life legislation passed, that we were able to protect our gun rights, as well as a bill to save women's sports. That the governor vetoed a bill that simply said this, that biological boys should not be allowed to play in competitive sports up and through college. And I know that he vetoed that bill, but fortunately common sense prevailed, and that we have legislation now in Kentucky that protects women's sports as well.
There were 2 issues that obviously divided Republicans, and they will both come around again: sports betting and medical marijuana. Where do you stand on those issues?
Well, when it comes to medical marijuana, we have been focused on hemp in Kentucky, and I think that there's an opportunity for us to use our existing hemp program for the medical benefits, some of which we're still studying and trying to understand, by using Kentucky's hemp program. I am open to different versions of medical marijuana, but it depends on what's in the bill. But right now, as Ag Commissioner, we're focused on a robust hemp program.
Hemp as a substitute for marijuana as the medicine?
That's right. There's a lot of components in hemp that we're still studying, one of which is CBD. It's been around for a while. That's one of about 100 different compounds in the floral part of the plant. And we believe that there may be an opportunity for us to use the existing hemp program for medical benefits. And we think that this is something we know there's interest of in our program. But we also need to be realistic that if Kentucky wants to join other states, we got to have the legislative support as well to make that happen. And I think using hemp might be a logical way to do that.
Sports betting. The state senator who represents your area wants it, Damon Thayer, the Republican majority leader, but they couldn't muster the votes in the Senate.
That's right. The version of it passed the House. On the Senate side, there weren't enough votes to get it across the finish line. I think that Kentucky needs to be realistic about what a lot of Kentuckians already do. And so we can have a conversation about sports betting, but I also think that it's so important that we protect Kentucky values and that we listen to the views of all Kentuckians, but also be realistic about what other states have already done.
After 8 years in office, 2 terms, you are term limited. You indicated last year that by the holidays, Christmas, the New Year's, you would have made up your own mind. You didn't say when you would let everybody else know about what you may do next year. What are you going to run for?
Well, Bill, I feel blessed to be where I'm at. For a kid that grew up on a tobacco farm and got to experience a really great childhood growing up working, and for someone that has spent their life dedicated to Kentucky public service, I feel like I have a strong track record of executive leadership, and I also feel a calling right now that I could provide Kentucky, if the voters would like, more public service and leadership in our state. I'd like to announce that I will be running for governor in the Commonwealth of Kentucky in 2023 because the voters deserve a choice on Election Day, and they deserve a governor that's going to bring us all together and unite Kentucky.
You're announcing today you're running for governor next year.
That's right. And we want the voters and Kentuckians to know that I'm in this race. We know that it's going to be a long process and that it's going to be a crowded primary, and that's okay. As the Republican Party grows, we have to get more used to having primaries. I'm going to have a lot of friends in this. I don't look at it as me running against somebody else. We're all just applying for the same job. But I think Kentucky needs executive leadership that's proven, one that's going to be focused on uniting us, not dividing us, and one that I think will give a message of hope and a positive vision for our state. And so I'd like Kentuckians to join me on June 1st in my home county, in Scott County, for a formal announcement where we will set forth a vision for the Commonwealth of Kentucky.
And you'll be rolling out your campaign a little bit ahead of that, as I understand it. You're traveling, right?
We are, well, that's part of the job, and we will continue to do the job of Agriculture Commissioner across our state, but also begin that conversation about the governor's race in 2023. And look, I'm really realistic about this. I think that that anytime you put your name out there, you have to have some courage. There's going to be some friends that join you. But I look forward for a positive message, one that is a clean race and one that's focused on the issues.
Can the Republicans defeat the Democratic Governor Andy Beshear, who has a positive approval rating? It shows up around 60% in some polling.
Oh, I think so. There's an undercurrent across Kentucky right now of people who are dissatisfied. There's a lot of folks that I've talked to on a daily basis across our state that are eager for someone to step up to the plate. They're eager for there to be a choice on Election Day. And I think that that Andy Beshear is vulnerable across for re-election. And I think it's all about making sure that we mobilize the voters and give them a choice on Election Day. I look forward to that.
Commissioner, thanks for coming by and the big news that you've dropped here. We appreciate you coming.
Thank you so much.
We'll be back on WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers in just a moment, and we'll talk about climate change, how it might be possible for Kentuckians to impact that. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to Kentucky Newsmakers. The Citizens Climate Lobby is proposing putting a cost on carbon as a way to combat climate change. The group says that a strong economy-wide price on the carbon could reduce America's emissions by 50% by 2030. That's less than 8 years away. How would it work? How high are the political hurdles in a country where economic freedom is prized? Joining us now is John Clark, the Appalachian Regional Coordinator for the Citizens Climate Lobby. Welcome, John. Good to see you. Thanks for coming in.
Thank you, Bill.
You know, your group says that the way to reduce carbon emissions is to make it costly to emit carbon into the air by adding a price to fuels and products that produce CO2. Is that the proposal?
Absolutely. Yeah, we see climate change and global warming as kind of a market failure. The failure to price the damages done by fossil fuels to our climate, things like respiratory illness, heart disease, from fossil fuel pollution is not included in the price. So it's kind of an artificially cheap option right now. So we want to put a price on carbon pollution and kind of levelize the playing field and kind of incentivize clean forms of energy and kind of speed the transition that we already see is happening.
How does your group see that rolling out? I mean, would simply people would be aware that they would pay one price and then here's the carbon tax, or would it in all likelihood be rolled into the price of goods?
So it would be rolled into the price of goods. It would be put on the price of fossil fuels at the source. So at the well, the mine head, or the port of entry where they're imported into our economy. So that would make sure that emissions reductions would be covered nationwide over almost our entire economy, rather than just putting it at the pump kind of thing.
So to be clear, by design, people would pay higher prices.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's where the second most important part of this whole thing is the dividend that would be returned. We don't want to address climate change on the backs of low and middle income earners, so we want to return that revenue back to households equally. It's a way to incentivize people to reduce their own carbon footprint and keep more of that dividend check.
How do you see that working?
So we have studies done that about 2/3 of people would actually come out a little bit ahead in their dividend check, because a lot of people's carbon footprints aren't that heavy. If you're flying to Europe, or you're driving a Hummer, you're going to pay a little bit more and higher energy costs.
What does your group see happening right now with the climate that has those members who are involved, as aggressive as they are, as wanting something like this?
So we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. We have kind of a grassroots army. We're a peaceful army, so we're the most pleasant army you could ever hope to deal with. We go in and build relationships with members of Congress. They love meeting with us because we take a respectful, appreciative approach to dealing with this issue. So we are hoping to get everyone involved in coming to the table and talking about solutions.
Your own story is interesting. You were a letter carrier for a quarter of a century.
Yeah, right. I just retired from the post office as a letter carrier. I could see the impacts of climate change. I'm working outside all day, as I'm sure most people here can see the impacts. I start to see winters becoming very mild. I saw less snow when I was a kid. I could see snow hanging around all winter long, up in Pennsylvania where I'm from. And, snow is just basically going away. So.
Many critics of doing something fast to try to address this say the U.S. can't go it alone. What about goods that come into the U.S. from other countries that have not been treated in this way with a carbon levy?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's a good point. You can think of fee and dividend legislation as kind of a three-legged stool. You have that tax on carbon emissions, you have that dividend coming back to households to protect from rising energy costs, and then that third leg of the stool is a border tax adjustment. So that puts a border tax on any imports coming from any countries like China or India that don't have a price on carbon on their imports. So that incentivizes them to do something about the carbon emissions in their economy.
What about the concerns that other countries do continue to belch carbon into the air, and that if America does that we have put ourselves at an economic disadvantage?
Yeah, so we've always been a leader in this in the world, and I think getting ahead of the game is actually going to put us ahead with our economy. Kind of incentivizing clean energy. A lot of other economies are already transitioning away from fossil fuels, and the EU is actually talking about putting a border tax adjustment on our goods because we don't have a price on carbon. They pay about euros per ton right now. So American manufacturers will be paying the EU's carbon tax. So the incentive is for us to put a carbon tax in place in our economy, keep more of that revenue in our own economy.
In a state like Kentucky, there's long been a strong anti-regulatory stance among many, certainly in politics. We've had the coal industry, for instance, which was a very key and important part of the economy here for many years. Isn't the political lift heavy unless you can point to the benefits and point those out to lawmakers and the public?
Absolutely. We actually have 96 co-sponsors of the Energy Innovation and Carbon Dividend Act. They're all Democrats. We want a bipartisan bill. We absolutely need communities like coal communities in Kentucky to come to the table and talk about climate solutions, because this issue is being addressed by outside entities. Things like clean energy mandates, or divestments from fossil fuels, or even bans on coal being exported. These things are all happening now, and it's not beneficial to coal communities.
Do you think, your group has said that there could be a ripple effect in the economy in a positive way if
Absolutely.
we head down this path?
Yeah, absolutely. The dividend check would act like an economic stimulus, basically. It's going to put more money in people's pockets.
We have new battery plants coming to Kentucky. There's one to be near Bowling Green, two that are being built by Ford near
Right.
Elizabethtown. We have solar farms that are popping up. Does that give you hope that Kentucky and states like it and surrounding it are open to this green change?
Yeah, absolutely. That's great news. I think the coal industry, might employ like 4,000 people in Kentucky. This new Ford battery plant, I think, is going to employ like 5,000 people. So there's a lot of benefits to kind of making this transition that's happening now. We just need to speed that transition and bring more jobs into places.
But John, your group has said that this could happen by 2030. That a substantial reduction could be done by 2030. Is that timetable overly ambitious?
Well, we always see...
When you're saying you don't even have the Republicans on board
Right.
to sponsor legislation at this point.
Right. Yeah, once we get this policy in place, and we don't consider this a silver bullet, We need a lot of different solutions. It gets us a large chunk of the way to reducing emissions to what President Biden pledged, which would be 50% by 2030, net zero by 2050. But yeah, we absolutely need everyone coming to the table and talking about the solution.
What is your next step? I mean, this obviously you're out traveling in the area that you're responsible for and talking to people. What's the next step? How do people get more information if they're interested?
Yeah, so people can come to our website, citizensclimatelobby.org. You could sign up. Our organization exists for two purposes: to create the political will for a livable world, and then second is to empower individuals to have breakthroughs in their personal and political power. That means we train citizens to meet with their legislators and talk about this issue with them and have personal power in addressing this issue.
When people tell you they're just not interested, is that the end of the conversation?
No, I mean, we talk to everyone. I mean, obviously we need to, we need a lot more involvement from, communities like this community in Kentucky. But again, if we need everyone kind of coming to the table and talking about solutions so we can bring everyone on board.
John Clark with the Citizens Climate Lobby, their Appalachian Regional Coordinator. Thanks for coming by. We appreciate it. All right. Stay with us. We'll be back to wrap up Kentucky Newsmakers in a moment. We do want to thank you for joining us for this edition of Kentucky Newsmakers. Join us for the latest news throughout the day on WKYT and the CW Lexington. And of course, updates always on WKYT.com. I'm Bill Bryant. Make it a good week ahead.